Dr. Krick, it's a pleasure to have you. We've had some conversation or a conversation in the past, and I was just so impressed with your knowledge with the world of autoimmunity. I think it's one of those things that people have a lot of issues navigating. And like we just talked about before we hit record, I've been doing a lot of calls with individuals dealing with autoimmunity, and I've experienced it a little myself, but my eyes have really been open to the extent of which individuals are struggling. And it's one of those things where, the traditional system kind of leaves people on an island. And they're a bit lost when it comes to answers for everything.
Very much so. Yeah, completely agree.
Yeah. And so from your perspective, like when you think about healing from an autoimmune type of condition, obviously, the word curing, there's a whole lot of connotations there, and curing is a weird thing to say, but from a healing standpoint, what have you really seen for individuals that have had the biggest breakthroughs? What have been the biggest movers?
Oh gosh, that's a deep question there, Ryan. But the short answer to that question would be gut health. Gut health is just so often just a big mover with regards to, somebody's symptomatology, whether it be an autoimmunity or it be something like pain or it be brain fog or energy or motivation or whatever the case may be. But even within the category of gut health, there's 50 different products and labs and different things. So that's kind of a broad umbrella. But I think that even just going back to some of the things you said is like remission versus curing somebody. Somebody might have X, Y, or Z symptom that they're complaining about, and then they go in and they get this diagnosis. They say, "Oh, you have Hashimoto's," and you think, "Okay, well, boom! Now I finally have the answer. This is why I feel X, Y, and Z issues because I have this Hashimoto's." But what if those symptoms go away? What if the thyroid symptoms, the brain fog, the digestive symptoms? What if those symptoms go away? Do you still have Hashimoto's? And that's where the confusion comes in with remission versus did I reverse this disease? Because a lot of people might have thyroid antibodies, but do they have a disease if they don't have any symptoms? And that's against a little bit of semantics, a little bit of understanding the mechanisms. Um, so just to touch on something you said there, but I do think that gut health is one of the biggest levers. So, and I'll try, I listened back to our conversation from a couple of years ago. I'm going to try to just answer your questions and I'll expand on that, Ryan, but I'm going to let you guide if you want me to expand on that or anything like that. But for your question, gut health is a really important lever. Yeah.
Yeah, I what's so fascinating about that as well is, like, I think a lot of individuals with autoimmunity that maybe if they don't even have gut symptoms, it's still they're
Well,
still presenting gut issues.
well, that is a fascinating thing to bring up too, because a lot of people I see, they might say like, my gut's fine. Like I poop every day and I don't have any bloating, I don't have any constipation, I can eat whatever I want, whatever. And that doesn't mean that it's fine, but the gut is the gateway to a lot of autoimmune conditions. And so even as part of what I do, Ryan, is like a lot of education and teaching people, but I'm not usually first grade teacher. I'm usually more like their college professor after they've learned things and been to different specialists or been to different labs or read different books or listened to different podcasts or things like that. But let's say you pick 5 books off the shelf for autoimmunity. Like at Barnes and Noble, you just go to the health section and it's like autoimmune this, autoimmune that. They're all going to say, start with the gut. They're all going to say the gut is important, the microbiome is important. They might use different brands of probiotics. They might use different brands of lab tests. They might use different tools in their tool belt. But every single autoimmune expert is going to say how important gut health is. And so that's even as I was evolving my understanding of this, it was just like, boy, it seems like everybody's saying that. It seems like everybody's saying start with the gut, start with the gut, start with the gut. And so and for a long time I maybe didn't, but that's kind of how my, understanding of it has evolved. But that's not the only lever. Or I also see a lot of people too, Ryan, that might say, like, I've spent the last year working on my gut. I've had 4 labs. I've taken every probiotic. I've taken every glutamine powder. And then they're coming to me and we're kind of thinking, okay, well, what else? So if somebody's already pulled that lever and it hasn't yielded the results that they want, then we're thinking about, okay, well, what other levers do we need to pull with regards to toxins or stress or, fill in the blank for the other, mechanisms or drivers. But your question was, what have you seen be the biggest lever puller? And gut health is a pretty easy answer there. Yeah.
Totally. And obviously, everybody has their own biases in terms of, there's people who think a vegan diet is the cure all, and people that think a carnivore diet is the cure all, and everything kind of in between, which is why I love data, which is why I've think that the stool tests and some of these more advanced testing provide so much insight because you could get so
Yeah.
precise with how you approach things. You don't have to, you know, think about your own biases and what you think are right. You have the data to
Yeah.
kind of give you a solution and a path forward.
And I tell people that all the time. They're like, hey, we're going to test your gut, but we don't know what we're going to find. Or I might say, sometimes, and this is after I have seen thousands of patients and gut tests and things like that. I say, it sounds like you have bacterial overgrowth in your gut. But sometimes when we run the labs, it's like, oh, shoot, I was wrong. You have undergrowth. We need to plant seeds. But a lot of times takes the guesswork out too. But a lot of the things that people are doing are sometimes just literally the exact opposite of what they need to be doing. They know that their gut's important for autoimmunity because they've, again, read a book or listened to a podcast about it. So they go out and what's the first thing they do? They start taking probiotics. Well, if
Hmm.
we run their stool tests, they might have overgrown bacteria. And so then they're planting seeds in an overgrown field. And it's like, no, 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 no. You were this close to doing the right thing. You were in the right field and everything. But instead of planting seeds, you need to pull weeds. So the testing can just take some of the guesswork out. Or again, like if this number's too high, we want to lower it. If this number's too low, we want to raise it. And it takes some of the opinion or bias out of it of just like, hey, I don't care how we do it. I don't care if it's through food restriction or if it's through, crystals or I'm just picking random things, but just like
No doubt.
whatever gets these inflammatory markers down, I'm all for. And
Hmm.
meds are usually the last thing on our plate, but there's a time and a place for those too. Whatever gets these inflammatory markers down, that's our goal. But it does the data. I'm a big
Absolutely.
fan of the data too because it takes some guesswork out and it just at least instead of an opinion, it's a little more like, hey, this is too low or this is too high, and you don't need to take my opinion for it. It's like the lab says it.
Hmm. Yeah, no doubt about that. And I think I have a good friend who had Crohn's disease or has Crohn's disease, depending on the semantics of, and he was somebody who was working a traditional 9 to 5 office job, and he got this condition, and it kind of forced him to reevaluate things, and um, he ended up, you know, going to work with an individual like yourself that ran these stool tests after I think like years of no help from the traditional field of medicine. And I think he said, as simple as just taking a GI map test did more for his health than all the years and all the specialists and all the primary care physicians that he had seen. It was as simple as finding someone who understands how to read these tests and what to do with the results. And his results were incredible. And it's just so fascinating how some of these tests aren't more mainstream.
Well, yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking as you were saying this, because in my mind, it's not like us or them. It's like, well, why are we not doing them both? Because
Totally.
sometimes somebody with Crohn's needs prednisone like right away because
Hmm.
they're losing weight and they're pooping blood 17 times a day, and it's like you need prednisone. But then it's like, well, what is causing it? And that's where they leave off too. And it's insanity to me of like, well, why isn't there more of a blended model, even from a gastro office? Like you're going to this specialist who's supposed to be the top person for your gut issues, and you think like this person's giving me everything that's out there. And then you end up getting all these answers from like a, $500 stool test or something. And I saw this girl recently, she was 7 years old and she had stomach pains for like a long time, enough that her parents were seeking, medical care and stuff. So the pediatrician referred them to a pediatric gastroenterologist. They did a colonoscopy. They said, "Good news, you don't have Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. Seems like it's all anxiety." And we ran a GI map, and she had a parasite, she had gluten sensitivity, she had H. pylori, she had there was a fourth, I forget what it is. But it was like, all four of those can cause stomach pain. How dare they tell you that it's just anxiety? It's like crazy. And that's after thousands of dollars of probably insurance money, not like the parents are
Mm-hmm.
paying out of pocket, but just the burden on the system, the timing. And then this first grade girl, like, it's all anxiety. It's like, that's so not the case, and so such a partial truth, whereas it could be all these other things and they're not even looking. So it feels like you're taking crazy pills when you live in this world. But that's, your friend's story is like par for the course. That's most people, that's what they've had. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it blows my mind. It's quite frustrating, frankly. I feel so bad for those individuals that are suffering and haven't found those answers yet from the traditional, world of things, and haven't, been exposed to this type of information.
Yeah. And
It's
I
it's
think a
really
lot of the
sad,
people
but
that a lot of people that find me, or find, services like yours or podcasts like yours or things like that, they're the people that are looking. And those are, honestly, it is sad. There's a lot of people out there suffering, but I always say too, it's almost like I've got a lifeboat, and there's a lot of people drowning. Well, guess who I want to pick up? The people that are swimming towards me, not the people that are just like kind of sitting there like, oh, why am I drowning? Like, the people that are actively seeking out this information. And you don't have to be an expert in it, but you're reading a book, you're listening to a podcast, you're on Reddit, or you're joining an autoimmune forum. You got Crohn's disease. It's like, well, join a community of people, and don't join a community of people who are all suffering and talking about their symptoms. Join a community of people
hmm
who are trying to solve it. And those are kind of the people that find, my services. um and they want to know, like, well, what else can I do about it? And it's like, well, have you done a GI map? Have you done a stool test? And they're like, no. Like, well, let's start there. Or food
hmm
sensitivities or toxins, or it can expand. Testing can expand pretty quickly, but that's always a good place to begin, depending on what somebody's had.
it is it is so true there. And I was just writing down food sensitivity because I wanted to make a point to talk about it, because um I I don't have the knowledge to know whether the food sensitivity tests are high quality. I've gotten a lot of mixed results from food sensitivities, and I think a lot of that is a reflection of the quality of tests.
Hmm.
And I'm still trying to figure out which are the reputable brands, which is why we currently don't sell any, because I've been, still in that process trying to figure out which ones um are useful and aren't,
Well, and
because
I know that, sorry to jump in, but I know that you had an MRT test, and there's just
yes.
different testing methodologies too, that the ELISA testing people say the MRT is not as good. The MRT says it's he said, she said, is my point. And
hmm
it's whatever yields people answers that work, that yield results. But anyway, I jumped in there, but there is a lot of like quality differences, and cooked versus raw foods, and just testing methodology and things like that. So it gets to be a difficult world to navigate for people too.
And so, what have you found to be those food sensitivity tests that you would recommend?
Yeah. So one of my favorites is Cyrex. And
Okay. Yep.
again, from a biased but unbiased standpoint, the reason that I came to favor Cyrex is everybody else I was learning from in the autoimmune world. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when I was kind of getting into this space, everybody was like, Cyrex or bust, Cyrex or bust, Cyrex is the only way. And in the industry, Cyrex is considered like the best. And I love Cyrex, and I'm doing a webinar for Cyrex next month and things like that. So, work closely with Cyrex as a company, but I also do others, like for you and for your company. Like, sometimes I do finger pricks because the convenience, and I'm not saying it's better or worse, but I haven't seen any evidence to say that it's any worse. but sometimes the convenience of not having to go in for a blood draw. So, and there's another company that I use called KBMO, and I learned about it from a friend of mine who's a pediatrician out in California. But you can do 22 foods, which is
Mm,
cheap, or you can do 132 foods, which is more expensive, or you can do 176 foods. So there's a little bit different variable. You know, Cyrex, one of the problems is it's expensive, which
mhm,
is, again, there's high value to that. I'm not saying it's too expensive. I'm just saying from a straight up price tag standpoint, not everybody's wanting to go drop, 550 plus bucks on their food sensitivities. They might be just wanting to kick the tires of gluten, dairy, eggs, corn, things like that.
absolutely.
So I
Yep.
like having options for people too. And there's a few other companies, Ryan, that I've done in the past, but and then people will bring to me the Everly Wells or the Alatesses or just some of the MRTs or things like that. So there's a lot of other companies out there, but those are the two that I kind of do the most often, by far.
Got you. Yeah, I've heard that same thing about Cyrex being really just the gold standard, and it seems like anyone who I really respect in the industry, that, like exactly what you said, that
Yeah.
tends to be the test that they're using.
Yeah, and Dr. Vijayadani is
So
a mentor of mine and somebody I've learned from for years. But he invented food sensitivity testing, like in the early '80s. So he's kind of considered the godfather of just this testing as a science itself. But he's the clinical director for Cyrex. And another thing, this isn't necessarily just a Cyrex commercial, but one of their selling points is they do raw and cooked foods because there's a lot of foods that nobody eats raw. So why are they tested raw? But a lot of the food sensitivity labs are using raw antigens, and they change when they're cooked. A cooked egg doesn't look like a raw egg does. The protein has changed, and so doing raw versus cooked is just another one of Cyrex's, I don't know, areas of excellence of
sticking
why,
points. Yep.
yeah, or why it might be a little more expensive. Because it is a little more valuable. So if somebody comes to me, let's say with an audit, like I see this all the time, people come to me and they're like, I've been diagnosed with this weird autoimmune condition. I want to know what I can do. And I'm like, well, let's look for what's driving it. Like I saw somebody last week. She just started her freshman year in college at Purdue. She's got a mixed connective tissue disease. That's kind of like mixed connective tissue disease. Also, is kind of a BS diagnosis. It's like we don't know what's wrong with you, basically.
Like IBS.
Yeah, but we've got some kind of autoimmunity that's attacking your connective tissue, but it's not lupus, it's not Sjogren's, it's not RA, it's not all these things. So it's just kind of a mixed connective tissue disease, more like a broader classification. But she's clearly got autoimmunity. There's not a clear name for it, but they just wanted to look for what's driving it. So we tested metals and chemical reactivities. We tested for bugs and we tested for foods, and the chemicals were completely clean. The bugs, we found maybe the most info, and the foods, we found some info too. Now, I had another person, Ryan, fairly recently, like a week before, we did the exact same 3 tests. The three from Cyrex, looking for the drivers of autoimmunity. And for this person, hers was chemicals. She's lost chemical tolerance. Every single chemical on there showed up in the red. And she doesn't
Mm,
notice that. She doesn't have multiple chemical sensitivity or anything like that. But when we're looking for what is your immune system reacting against, sometimes it's reacting against foods, and that's what's called oral tolerance. Sometimes it's reacting against chemicals, and that's called chemical tolerance. Sometimes it's reacting against bugs, and what's driving this loss of tolerance? And foods are one of the answers to that. But it's interesting how two people with two different autoimmune conditions might have very completely different drivers. They both might value from like a gluten-free diet or the fish oil or glutathione or certain supplements, but what are the different individual,
mhm.
uniquenesses? That's where somebody like me comes into play, or where labs come into play too. It's like, hey, everybody should exercise, everybody should diet, everybody should whatever, take these certain supplements. What do you need? That's what labs can help guide people on.
And do you feel like the food sensitivities come as a result of the gut, in the sense of, it's this leaky gut? Because the story I've been told is essentially it's leaky gut causing the body to overreact to certain foods that are coming in. And then over time, your body starts to develop a memory of these foods and starts to remember, okay, this caused some issues, so you know, let's cause some inflammation here and get an antibody reaction to these different things. Um, and it seems like the root cause for that stems from gut issues. But even in the cases where you heal the gut, some of those food sensitivities can still be there because your body has this memory. Is that your thinking along the?
Yeah, that's true. And it's also, everything you said is true, but it's also nuanced too. Like if you have food sensitivities, does that mean you have a leaky gut? I think yes, but they also say, how do you know if you have a leaky gut if you have a vowel in your name? Everybody has permeability of their gut.
That's
It lets good things in and bad things out. So does that mean your gut is completely destroyed and it's letting everything in? Or does that just mean it's normal? If we took 20 of your closest friends and tested them for food sensitivities, they're all probably going to have some. Now, if somebody has 100 food sensitivities versus the other person has 5, that absolutely matters with their gut health and the permeability and the polyreactivity and things like that too. But there's a lot of nuance to it. And even if somebody, let's say we work on your gut for 3 months and we test you for food sensitivities and you're like, dang it, I thought I was going to have 0 because we've been working on this for 3 months. You might never have 0. But what you're looking for from a testing too is like, hey, if my body's inflamed, what might be pouring fuel on that fire that I don't know about? And so when something like gluten or dairy or eggs or something shows up, it's like, okay, for the next 30, 60, 90 days, I need to avoid these foods because I'm trying to put this fire out. But there's a lot of variability. There's a graphic that I show, I show a lot of graphics and things in my clinical practice, as I'm teaching
Yeah, I love
people
those.
and on Instagram and, social and things like that. But there's a great one that's there's 4 stages. And the first stage says normal permeability. And so that's normal. The 4th stage is like full blown, everything gets in, and you can see what it's leading to. It's from the scientific literature. It's from a journal. I forget where the journal was published, but it leads to food allergies. It leads to a vicious cycle of inflammation. It leads to tolerance breaks. It leads to IBD. You can clearly see that like 1 is kind of normal and 4 is really bad. And everybody's on that spectrum somewhere, I think is the point. But if you're a 3 or 4, we got to get you down to a 2 or 1. And if you're a 1 or 2, it's like, okay, good. But there is a lot of nuance to food sensitivities and just understanding what they tell us, or even a perfectly healthy person might test positive for food sensitivities. Does that mean that they can't eat eggs? In my mind, it's like, no, if you feel fine, eat them. I think eggs are a superfood. I think they've got a lot of nutritional value, all these things we could go into. But if you're coming to me and you can't get out of bed because your joints hurt, and then we find eggs on your food sensitivity test, I'm going to say, hey, guess what? I think you should cut out eggs while we try to get this inflammatory load down. So yeah. And I think that again, too, even I was re-listening to our old podcast and I was like, man, I talk too much. So don't let me talk too much, Ryan. But
That is absolutely not the case.
but all those things is what is kind of the value of working with somebody. Is like, you could read every book and read every podcast, read every blog and things like that, and it's still a little bit confusing. But kind of working through like, what are the priorities and what do we want to aim at right now, or things like that, or understanding the value or the relevance or the timing of food sensitivity tests versus a microbiome test or a GI map or a intestinal permeability test, like from Cyrex. They've got an intestinal permeability test they're just different. And even in gut health, Ryan, going back to gut health, we just named GI map, intestinal permeability, food sensitivities. Those are 3 of the best labs. They're not the only 3, and they all fall within that category of gut health. So there's a difference between what's living in the gut with the microbiome or what the gut is reacting to, which is different, or foods. And even within that category, there's IgG testing, which is typical food sensitivities. There's IgA testing, which is the mucosal immune system. So it's knowing about when to order which lab for which purpose, or what they're telling us, or putting all those pieces into the puzzle and saying, here's how they fit into this puzzle of your overall health or your autoimmune journey. But all those things have value. It's just a matter of when and why and what we're looking for with all those. Does that make sense?
No doubt about that. Absolutely makes sense. And I think so much of having working with a practitioner is understanding um, the nature of how these things, the path of healing. Because I think, for myself, when I was on this journey, and even as I was very deep into the journey, and I was trying to do this when I was in college, when I was trying to heal my own personal autoimmune
I remember you
condition.
said like
And
your restrictions and food sensitivity test was in college was a hard time, but yeah.
yeah, totally. And I had one particular weekend where I kind of just said whatever, and I went out with my friends and had a few, I think it was 2 consecutive late nights where, there was alcohol involved, and I didn't get to bed at a reasonable hour, to say the least. And, I woke up on that Monday after that weekend, and I had this massive autoimmune flare-up. And for myself, I thought, because I had put this 4 months in prior of very strict, like, an autoimmune, um, uh AIP, or the autoimmune elimination diet.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I was like, oh, I thought I should be like healed at this point. Like, what is going on? But understanding, one, the path of healing isn't linear, and having a practitioner that is able to help guide you through that process and let you know that, like, you're not broken, and it's okay, is such a big advantage. And also just understanding, like, these things aren't forever. And, like, we have to put out the fire of some of these food sensitivities and stuff. But, over the course of your life, it's not like you can never have eggs again.
Right.
It's like a time and a place, and understanding that timing and understanding when you have the freedom to do what
Yeah.
is such an advantage when you're working with your own, when you're working with yourself, that you just don't have.
Well, and let me talk about that because I think that, again, so as you read a book or you work with a practitioner and they're like, you can never have gluten again ever in your life.
Mhm,
Period. End of story. No ifs, ands, buts. And I'm more like, have it. See how you feel. Now, not unlimited. And like, if somebody comes into me and they're unhappy, I'm like, hey, cut it out. But as they get happy, I'm like, hey, test the waters. One of the most intriguing experiments, dead serious, is drinking. Now, because also too though, Ryan, even if you have no health issues, I'm 40. I don't metabolize it the way I did when I was 30, and I sure don't metabolize it the way I did when I was 20. So some of those things just you can't handle what you used to be able to handle. But also, I see people all the time. I saw somebody yesterday. She's a nurse practitioner, and she was like, "Hey, we had a family event. She wasn't like going out and getting crunk on a Saturday night, but she was like, I drank and I felt fine the next day." And it's like that's a good sign. You got to test those waters, but it's kind of like a marathon. Even if you recover for 4 weeks straight and then you run a marathon, you're going to be inflamed no matter how much work you put into that. And that's fine. But then just knowing, well, you can't do a marathon every weekend, just knowing like whatever it was that weekend that you're talking about, the 2 nights in a row, is like that was too much for you and
mhm.
your autoimmunity flared. But it's like, could you have done one night, or do we test the waters again the next month, or things like that? But I don't think the answer to that is like you can never go out with your friends again and have
Such a
a
great
good
nuance.
time. It's more like, hey, let's continue working on your resilience, but you can never go out again like you did that time, 2 nights hard in a row or whatever. And sometimes you touch that stove, you get burned. You're like, well,
Mhm.
that was fun, but I can't do that all the time. You know what I mean? That's the typical going out in general. But all those things are just, again, the long-term application of this. I've got a lot of like good drawings and one of them I'll just describe to you, but it's a bar graph and the top is unhappy. And I'm like, hey, when people come into me, they're unhappy. We're working to get down below the line where they're happy. And I say everybody's line's at a different point. It's not usually zero, but like you can determine when you're happy. But at the beginning, we're going to work hard to try to get happy. And then we go and test the water. So I've got all these stories that I share with people when people say things like, I can eat a little bit of gluten and I'm fine. but I went to Disney World and I ate it 3 meals in a day with my kids, and I will never do that again. Or people will say, I can have a couple drinks and I feel fine. But I went out with my buddies till late night and I will never do that again. You know what I mean? It's like you touch that hot
Totally.
stove, you learn about it, but it's still what do we do moving forward? And I think that in my office too, there's a lot of like grace, if you want to call it that, or like ish, I would say eat paleo ish if you're happy with where you're at. If you're unhappy, it's like, no, we need to go autoimmune paleo. We need to go strict. You need to not touch these things with a 10-foot pole for a couple months. But once somebody gets down below the happy line and they're like, hey, I feel pretty good. They're like, okay, go test the waters and see, well, what can we get away with? Or what can we get away with from a supplement standpoint? And just that balance of like problems versus solutions. And as the problems get lighter, the solutions don't need to be as aggressive, but then knowing what we do or things like that. Another one too, and again, this is the last one I'll say, but vacation is by far the number one thing that makes people flare, which is weird because vacation's like healthy and good for your stress, but I just mean travel, whether it's restaurants or it's alcohol or whatever else. And I'm a fan too, Ryan, of what I call microcycles, where let's say you go on a vacation and you're eating at restaurants, you're maybe having a few beverages, you're traveling, it's stress, your sleep gets thrown off, whatever. Well, you might come home and do a microcycle of like a 1 week long gut protocol where it's not like you need to go 3 months, but for 1 week, you're taking more supplements, you're taking more probiotics, you're doing more food restriction, maybe you go gluten-free, sugar-free, dairy-free, grain-free, whatever for a week. And that's not exactly an AIP, you know, application, but it makes a huge difference. And you might have poured some fuel on the fire over here, and then you just want to balance that back out. And keeping that balanced, I think, is really, really important. And to avoid burnout too. Yeah.
So much good stuff there. And I think it again stems back to the reasons why having a coach or having a doctor that you trust is so powerful. Just because like developing those tools in the toolkit and learning when touch the stove and it's a little too hot, and you kind of just learn, you develop a very strong awareness of what you can and can't do. Like for
Yeah.
myself, I know it's a combination of lack of sleep, alcohol, and poor diet. It's like that trifecta. Is
Which
now I
often
built up
run
enough.
together,
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. But I built up enough health resilience that if I do any of those one, or even if I do any of those two in moderation, I'm fine. I'm totally fine. But those three, you know, together in a concentrated, way, it produces a flare. No matter how much health resilience I've gained, so you just learned so much for yourself of what can I do and what can't I do. And just that lack of or the relief from an anxiety standpoint of being able to go out and enjoy a nice meal with family and not being overly concerned with having to be perfect, or whether the cook is cooking with seed oils and all these things, being able to just enjoy a meal with friends and family is such a great aspect of being able to, you know, you've done the work to enjoy that point, and you don't have to be perfect all the time.
Well, and it's crazy how much like psychologically we can't measure, but like some of those things, I don't know that it's a net benefit, because people will drive themselves crazy about what they can and can't eat or what they can and can't do. And it's become a full-time job. And it's like, boy, if you just zoomed out, it might be better for your health. Now, I'm not saying go eat pizza, ice cream, beer every meal, but like just
Totally.
sometimes you need to zoom out a little bit. I also think another thing you mentioned, Ryan, but like I tell people sometimes, if somebody comes in, let's say they got Crohn's disease and they're in a flare, and we get them out of their flare and they're like, I'm doing so good. The best thing, almost the best thing that can happen, not the best thing, and always tell people this, like, I mean it in the best way, but for people to flare, because then they realize what caused their flare, and then we realize what can we do to get out of it. So let's say
Mhm.
that over the course of 6 months of a relationship with me, let's say somebody flares twice or 3 times or something. I'm like, well, I've got stories of this too, where first time somebody flared, it took us 2 weeks to get her out of it. The next time she flared, it took us 4 days to get her out of it, because you learn about what triggered this flare, sleep and foods and alcohol, but you also learn, well, what can I do to get out of it faster? Or what can I take, before I go out with my friends on a Friday night? What can I take that makes me a little bit more resilient? Again, at some point, we're not trying to cheat physiology, but there are things you can absolutely do and take that make you more resilient to some of those instances and exposures. But what can we do once we get into a flare? Because then people are a little more comfortable testing the waters. Like, hey, I'm going to eat a little bit of gluten because I know that if I flare, I can take this and get out of it. But it's really fascinating. Or if I see somebody that I've known for years, like I saw a lady today that she hasn't been on my schedule for 2 years. So when somebody like that's on my schedule, I'm like, ooh, she's flaring. Like, she's got a problem to solve. Otherwise, she wouldn't be coming to me, because that's kind of what I do, is help people solve their problems.
Yeah, yeah.
But 2 years ago, she was feeling pretty good. So sometimes if somebody gets to that point, I might say, hey, we don't need to put a next visit on the calendar. Call me when you need me, but things are going pretty good right now. But then if they call me 2 months from now, I'm like, okay, they're not where they want to be. Or if it's 2 years and it's like, hey, sometimes things are going really, really good for a really long time, and then they start slowly resurfacing, and it's like, okay, let's get these back into remission, or whatever the word is. But yeah.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think I'm curious, one, about those things that you do from a protocol standpoint when you do get into a flare up. Has there been anything that you think is particularly useful for individuals? I know it's hard on a broad basis to say, but any
Yes.
tools in the toolkit when someone is flaring?
Yeah, there's a couple supplements that are like blends of anti-inflammatories. So like one of them's called, like the technical name for it's called Neuroflam, which the name implies is like for neuroinflammation. And it's from Apex, and my mentor, Dr. Karazian, formulated it and stuff like that. But sometimes, and again, this doesn't work for everybody, but sometimes I have people take that in high doses, like crazy high doses, like 16 a day or 12 a day or something. That sounds, scary to say publicly, but they take it in high doses, and they might text the next day and they're like, it worked. Like, OMG, it worked. I slept through the night, my anxiety, my pain, my brain, whatever it is. So sometimes with some of those nutrients, even my mentor, Dr. Karazin, he said before, he's like, we know these nutrients do these things from the scientific literature. We just don't know how much somebody needs. He's like, so sometimes when you're giving somebody a dosage, is that if you fill your hand and it feels like a lot, add some more. So sometimes, and that's one of the things that I've learned just throughout my experiences working with people, and throughout my learnings and seminars and things like that. A lot of people in the autoimmune space were saying, like, whatever you do, don't underdose. Sometimes you're shooting a bear with a BB gun if you underdose. If somebody's taking 250 milligrams of turmeric a day, that's going to do a little bit of nothing. It's still good, don't get me wrong, but like, is it going to put a fire out? No, we're talking like a cup of water versus a fire truck worth of water.
Mm-hmm.
And the fire truck might be prednisone, something like that. But the metaphor is still the same, of like sometimes more. I also think that histamine is often involved in a lot of flares.
Really interesting.
So if somebody travels, or if the seasons change, or if somebody's, foods get off course, and a lot of times histamine is kind of a short-term thing that's like, oh, okay, I feel a little bit better. My brain fog, my joint inflammation, whatever the case is. But a lot of times it's the higher dose strategies, whether it be anti-inflammatories at high dose, antihistamines at high dose, or antioxidants at high dose. It's usually some form of those three. If we're talking about like flare protocol type things. Yeah.
Again, too, it's like why it's so beneficial to work with a practitioner, because um, you know, getting a lot of that higher dosing supplements can be a little scarier. You
Yeah.
might be doing the wrong thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of supplements too, Ryan, where it's like, I like, do not high dose this, or you're
To-
gonna cause a problem.
Absolutely.
Like a lot of killers, a lot of herbal things, or things like that. We always joke that it's often males but there's this term called detox bros. And it's like, if a little is good, a lot is better. And it's like, well, no, no, no,
Mhm.
no. With some things, you do not want to do that, or you're going to have more symptoms. And sometimes these, and again, it's not always males, but a lot of times it is. But they'll be like, man,
Totally.
that was rough. But I'm through. But my bottle's empty. What should I do next, doc? I'm like, dude, your bottle's already empty. Yeah, like that was gonna last you 3 months. But they high dose things like killers are a great example of like low and slow is better and in divided doses and things like that. But some of those things it's more high dose, or some of the things like vitamin D or vitamin A. Vitamin A is a great example.
Mhm.
Vitamin A could be high dose when you're sick. But if you high dose it for a long time, you can get vitamin A toxicity, and it can really jack
Mhm.
people up too. So there's a fine line, and the labs too. That comes back to the labs of like, and I also too, Ryan, will draw this out of like short term goals might be like, let's get you out of pain ASAP. Long-term goals might be like, well, let's keep your vitamin D is 80. Let's keep it there. Let's look at it again in 3 months or 6 months or whatever. But it doesn't look like that's your missing piece, but that's a long-term goal to keep it there. Middle term might be like, let's work on your gut for the next 2 months. And then let's detox for 2 months after that. Splitting things up into, well, what are our short-term goals, middle-term goals, or long-term goals, and keeping all those plates spinning. But the short-term goals might be the most urgent. The long-term goals might be the most important with your blood labs and just keeping an eye on your CBC, CMP, some of those basics, or C-reactive proteins, homocysteines, vitamin D, omega-3 levels. All those things are super important in your 20s, in your 30s, in your 40s, in your 50s, and whether you have an autoimmune condition or you don't want to die of Alzheimer's, or like fill in the blank for basically everything. They're important for basically everything. But so many people are neglecting them.
So true. And I think going back to what you were saying before about the dosing of different things, like you look at something like magnesium. For a lot of people, taking a lot of magnesium is going to be one of the best things you could do. Like I joke around with my friends sometimes, where, I'll be like, oh, I'm gonna go take some magnesium and I'll take like 9 pills. Uh, and, I have a very good brand of magnesium. So I don't recommend it to everybody if they're not working with the highest quality magnesium or haven't built up their bowels for for lack of a better word. But you know, something like that for just slashing like anxiety and just giving you a sense of relaxation and sleep is so powerful.
And
But if you just
magnesium's
took
like
one,
yeah, and it's like a necessary cofactor for 300 different things. But yeah, to your point too, but like if you only took one, you would never know. Or
hmm
there's also 50 different forms of magnesium. So somebody might try magnesium oxide and they're like, man, I pooped a lot, but I didn't sleep any better. It's like, all right, let's switch you to a magnesium threonate or magnesium glycinate or whatever the case is. So that's again kind of the art of, like, somebody might come to me knowing that magnesium's good. Like, okay, I agree. But what kind is good for you, and what dosage, and for what applications? If somebody's bowels get backed up, I'm like, hey, grab some magnesium. If somebody's sleep gets thrown off, I'm like, hey, grab some magnesium. If somebody comes with headaches, I'm like, hey, do you take magnesium? But what problems does that help solve? And then showing people too, Ryan, like, I could tell everybody this, and people believe me. Obviously, they're coming to me and they trust me and things like that. But I like showing people other people's info too. We've got a document that we show that I share with people. It's about inflammation. And it straight up says at the top, it says, many of the problems that patients present with in a functional medicine practice can drive inflammation, including sleep disturbances, food antibody reactions, environmental factors, psychological stress, and more. And it says, so it's important to work through what drove the inflammation. But it goes on to say, well, here's what you can do about it. And one of the things it says about fish oil is it says it can take 3 months for this to shift the patient's biology. Don't expect a person to say they felt better in a week. So I show that to people to just say, hey, like, this is not going to help your joint pain next week, but your omega index is 3.2. We need it to be higher. You need to do this for the next several months. And I say that because it's their health, it's their journey, they're driving. But if I tell them, like, hey, here's where you need to go, then I'm hoping that they go there. I'm hoping that they keep taking
yeah,
fish oil
that they follow
every
through.
day
Yeah.
for the next 3 or 6 months. Um, Even though it might not be solving our acute problems, it's hard to solve it without them. So keeping that all in mind with short term, middle term, long term, and lab goals and things like that is again part of the art of applying this for a person.
Got about it, and I think it's so fascinating. And so we've talked about, the gut kind of being the starting point, and the role food sensitivities play in that. And then we've also just kind of touched on toxins. From a toxin standpoint, I've been fascinated by something like niacin sauna protocol and seeing the result that that had on 9/11 survivors. But there's the world of we're so bombarded with toxins in the modern world. So it's just fascinating to see the role they play in a whole host of different things.
Yeah, well, and they're called toxins because they're toxic. They're toxic because they disrupt physiological functions. I mean, that's the basis of the name, but it is just insane. And I think that again, like everybody you read says toxins are bad. Now there's different controversial things of like, is it metals? Is it molds? Is it pesticides? Is it microplastics? And the answer is yes. But then my thing is like, well, what are you doing to detoxify? And I always say Ford says they're better than Chevy, says they're better than Toyota, says they're better than, they're all claimed to be the best. They're all good. So like sauna, great. Niacin flush, Hubbard protocol, that's called like, great if somebody's down to do that. But what else, And not everybody's willing to do coffee enemas, or not everybody's willing to do these different things.
Yeah,
B
they can be
vit,
intense for sure.
yeah, and even just like, again, detox is such a hard word because if somebody takes B vitamins, are they detoxing? Yes. B vitamins are great for a lot of detox pathways and blah, blah, blah. But are they really reducing the toxins that are stored in their brain tissue and things like that? That'd be quite a stretch. I don't think B vitamins are going to necessarily lower the whole body toxin burden, but are they a piece of that? Absolutely. And, the liver, the sweat, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 detox. And it is really trendy. And I think that also, too, a lot of people get caught up in like fancier, flashier trends. It's like,
Mm.
oh, you got to go to really get toxins out of your body, you got to go do $4,000 of hyperbaric oxygen training. And I'm like, well, no, you don't. But could it help? Sure, yeah. And if that fits in somebody's budget, great. It's an awesome thing. But what are you willing to do, or what are you going to do, or things like that? And finding something that you're willing to do or are going to do. But I think everybody, for the most part, obviously this is general, but for the most part, everybody agrees that toxins are bad and they can accumulate in the body and exposures and things like that. But then there's a lot of controversy about like, should I do chelation? Is it heavy metals? Is it molds? But I'm more like a generalist of like, all those things are true. Let's test your levels and see, and then let's go from there. I also say too, right, with testing, toxin testing is interesting. A lot of, we find great value to it all the time. But there's also controversy of like, well, this is the best test or this is the right test. Sometimes the value of testing is giving the person the evidence to believe in that they need to do it. So if
Such a
somebody's
great point.
got 24 toxins that are high, I'm like, hey, it's not metals or molds or plastics. It's everything. You just need to detoxify for a while. And that could include sauna, that could include chelation, that could include anything outside of what I'm going to suggest, but let's set a foundation of the things we're going to do, or, detox protocols or things like that. We see great success from those things. But sometimes it's like, well, like if somebody comes in with dizziness and memory loss, in 100% of the people, I'm suspicious of toxins, but are they? And are they willing to detoxify their brain if I suggest that? Or what evidence can I give them to convince them that this is kind of the next step they need to take? If they've read all the scientific literature, they're going to want to detoxify their brain because the literature is pretty clear. Like toxins disrupt things and lead to dementia, Alzheimer's, etc. But a lot of people are just like, why do I feel so scattered? Why do I feel so, overwhelmed and frazzled and I can't remember things and I can't keep my to-do list straight and all these things, they're not always thinking I need to detoxify my brain. So we're sometimes just looking for some evidence to confirm that to them, but it's also looking for what could be driving dysfunction, and all these, things play into the options that are out there and how to navigate this world of like wellness that we live in.
It's it's one that I think is getting more and more of its shine nowadays, the world of toxins, but for a long time it wasn't something that was talked about at all.
Yeah.
Um, it's really fascinating how it's kind of starting to have its moment, if you will.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and still, like cigarettes and things like that, like there's big examples where it's like, oh yeah, ding, ding, like asbestos and cigarettes and like big, like global things that really disrupted a lot. People used to smoke on
mhm,
planes and in bars and asbestos and things like that. But we know those big examples of like, well, yeah, that stuff is toxic. But we don't talk about the microplastics or the
mhm,
airborne toxins or those things. That's what's fascinating. Is just the sheer amount that we're exposed to. And
yeah,
it really, when you talk about like everybody talks about like the toxic bucket, but it's so true. It's like if you're filling it faster than it's emptying, you're gonna get sicker and sicker and sicker, and if you're filling it slowly, you're going to get sick slowly. If you're filling it really fast, you're going to get sick really fast. And we see these different cases of like, especially with mold, because mold is the most obvious where somebody's health can go downhill really fast.
it's really scary. Yeah,
It is. Whereas metals and some of these pollutions and wildfire smoke and all those other things, it's just not always as obvious. Whereas somebody lives in mold and or like I see people, that have 9 kids, 11 kids, 7 kids, 10 kids, and they're like, we've got this all in our household. I'm like, okay, ding, ding, ding. Like something's making you guys sick. But it's fascinating because you just don't always see it. It's like the death by 1,000 cuts kind of thing.
mm,
You don't always
such a
see
great
it,
analogy.
but
Yeah,
it's accumulating, and that is getting more and more exposure, whether it be with the Maha movement and everything with Robert Kennedy and politically and stuff like that, or it be just with the growing, chronic disease epidemic. It's getting a little more light shined on it now, um, which is cool. But that also shines a light sometimes on the negative things too, meaning like in my industry of like, well, yeah, toxins are bad, but does everybody need a binder? Does everybody need glutathione? Does everybody need a liver flush? Does everybody need a brain detox? And that's again where there's like right
nuance.
things for you and nuances, or like if you try something and you feel like you're getting worse, guess what? Not good. We don't want things to get worse, but what are we doing and is it nudging the needle? And yeah, so all those things matter and we test those things often, and yeah.
And just for the average person, let's say, who's obviously they know they're being exposed to toxins because, they live in America, they live in the modern world, if you will. Um, is it what are the things that they should be doing from, daily, weekly standpoint to kind of combat just some of that maintenance, if you will,
Yeah.
for the toxin
So,
load?
I mean, in my mind, it like filtering your air is like the number one most important. More so than even eating a clean diet, but I think the air, you breathe just from a quantity standpoint, you breathe an insane amount of, it's like 50,000 gallons of air a day or something insane like that. But it's also airborne toxins that direct us to the brain. So in my mind, it's like filter your air, filter your water, and then clean up your diet. And it doesn't have to be 100% again, but like 80-20, 90-10, whatever we would even uh, numerically quantify that. But then it's like personal care products or things like that. Those things are super trendy and they're super true too. But it's also like sometimes if your bucket's full, instead of pulling the pebbles out of the bucket, you just like, let's look for the rocks. Let's look for the boulders, and that's where molds or other metals or some of those things that can accumulate. It's like, well, let's test and see. But otherwise, heck yeah, change out your shampoos, change out your soaps, change out your toothpaste. But I don't really see those things move people in a good direction with their health. I think it might
Totally. It's like
slow the bad direction of disease. but it doesn't really solve problems, because most people come to me and they're like, oh, for the last year since I've been sick, I've been switching out all my cookware. I've been switching out my personal care products. I've been switching out this. I'm like, okay, good. That's good. That's good for your long-term health, but it's not going to solve your problem. So that's from maybe an environmental standpoint. I think from there, Ryan, I would say sauna is great. Just as a strategy, it's not the only one, but if somebody can weekly sauna, if somebody can twice a week sauna, whatever the case may be, but it's just another way of getting things out. The only way that things get out of our body is pooping, peeing, breathing, and sweating. And so if you're pooping every day, if you're peeing on a normal basis, you don't necessarily want to speed those two up, but you can speed up the sweating and the breathing too. You don't really want to speed up, but that's like opening up a fourth door to just get toxins out. So I think that's a good one. And then after that, then I would say supplements come into play, whether it's a liver support or it's you know, there's a detox protocol called a push catch detox protocol, which is like a 30-day liver detox. It's patented. It's from Quicksilver, but it's just one example of like a cleanse or a detox. But then in my office, it might be like some general things like that. Like, hey, like I had somebody come in the other day. She was like, hey, do you have any cleanses? I was like, well, we've got this push catch liver detox. Is that what you mean? And she ended up buying a parasite cleanse. But there's things you can do that are just generally good ideas, but they're guesses.
Hmm.
But the next level deeper would be, well, let's see what your labs show. Do you need B vitamins? Do you need glutathione? Do you have different genetic SNPs? Are your liver enzymes elevated? Sometimes somebody's liver enzymes look perfect and their kidneys look like a wreck. And it's like, oh, it's not your liver, it's your kidneys, even though they're both filtration organs. So that's where labs come into play, is once you've done some of the basics, filter your air, filter your water, looking into considering some of those things, switching out some products, trying to lead a non-toxic life, whatever, then you can go deeper with labs. And that's when the labs are helpful.
No doubt. Well, Dr. Taylor, thank you so much for doing this today. It's always such an insightful conversation when I speak with you, and um, it's really refreshing to you know speak with an individual who is helping people in this way, because the world of autoimmunity is such a hard one to navigate, and so many people, like we said at the beginning of this conversation, are lost. So I mean, I love the work that you're doing, and appreciate you taking the time for doing this today.
Yeah, absolutely. And one more thing I'll say is, like, the world of autoimmunity, let's say you're just a normal person and you get diagnosed with autoimmunity. That alone is a tricky world. It's tricky to navigate, especially if you're starting at first grade with autoimmunity. But and like I said, I'm a little more like autoimmune, college professor, but that's also hard to navigate. The deeper that you get into wellness or biohacking or whatever, you want to call it, it almost gets more confusing, because one person's saying keto, one person's saying high carb, pro metabolic, one person's saying carnivore, one person's saying vegan, one person's saying you got to take methyl B's, and another person's saying methyl B's create anxiety. There's just like, everybody's got a little bit of partial truths, but what is your truth and what does your body need and how is your body responding? That's again the value that I play, is because in today's world, these things are getting more light shined on them. More people are asking these questions, more people are seeking this information, more people are aware of parasites and molds and metals than have ever been aware before. But they're still a little bit lost because of all the options and the info, and they just still get paralysis by analysis, where they're like, bah, like nothing seems to be working. I'm just going to go back to like, none of this is real. I'm just going to live a standard American life. And so
Hmm.
it's interesting, but that's what we do, is just help people navigate this world, whether it's their diagnoses and their options, or usually in my office, it's like, hey, I've done 10 things, I've run 10 labs. What am I missing? Um, but it is a growing space, and it's good for you and I and the podcast and the people that we talk to and try to help, because there's more people seeking out information like the information that you are providing and that I provide. But it's still harder to navigate. So I think there's a
No
growing
doubt.
role for people like you and I and the content that we provide, because even if it's free content like a podcast, that helps people a lot. You know, they hear somebody like me talk on your podcast, or they hear an interview that I've done or somebody else, and they're like, okay, that makes sense with me. So all this stuff helps people just navigate it, but they're having trouble with it, I would say.
100%. I mean, that was the path forward for myself is listening to conversations like this and making this really a staple in my day. And it opened the door to just so much awareness of what was out there, what was possible. And, you started connecting your own dots, and you gain that education. And yeah, I think it's so valuable for people, and very appreciative of the work you do. And thankful and grateful that you took the time today.
Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me, Ryan. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed our last conversation, and this one was great too. So anytime, just let me know.
Yes, sir.
Cool.